Hello, my name is Juro and welcome to another Baldur's Gate 3 build video. In today's video, I'll be showing you my take on the Radiating Orb Cleric build, which in our case will be a Cleric Ranger multiclass that will focus around dealing damage primarily with Spirit Guardians and then in later stages with our ranged attacks. So we will be a high dexterity build. We'll also get extra attack and we'll be able to inflict Radiating Orb Reverberation and reeling with our ranged attacks, but Radiating Orb and Reverberation with both our ranged attacks and our Spirit Guardians. So let's get into the character creation. So for our race, I went with the vanilla option of a human. I like humans because they give you the human versatility. So you get an additional skill to be proficient in, and your carrying capacity is increased by a quarter. So this will be useful for lugging around a lot of potions of healing and arrows on many targets with us. You can go with any other race you may prefer. It's completely up to you. It doesn't really change the character all that too much, and it is pretty versatile. Though, of course, if you go as one of the shorter races, you might have a little bit of issues since you have 25 feet of movement. So you want high speed so you can inflict as many rating orbs on as many characters as you can per turn, since you'll be moving around quite a lot. Then for our class, we're of course going as a cleric. For the cleric cantrips, we want to take resistance and guidance. These are, I think, a must-have if you have a cleric on your party, regardless if they are the main character or not. If this is the main character of your party, I would suggest taking Thaumaturgy instead of Sacred Flame. This is going to help you with your dialogue choices, since it gives you advantage on intimidation and performance checks. Otherwise, I would suggest taking Sacred Flame or taking Thaumaturgy regardless, in case this character ends up in dialogue somehow. Blade Ward and Produce Flame I don't think are too useful in this case, since Produce Flame is really good only for creating a light, since if you want to attack with it, you need to use up 2 actions basically. And Blade Ward, you use 1 turn to gain 2 turns of resistance to piercing, slashing, and bludgeoning. In my opinion, it's not worth it. And there's also better ways of getting this effect than just casting this cantrip. For the subclass, we're going with the Light Domain, of course. This gives us Light Cantrip built in, which is very useful. Then for our Light Domain spells, we will not be using this too much, as our spell slots primarily will be reserved for at level 5 and onwards for Spirit Guardians, and before that it's gonna be preserved for Bless and the occasional Sanctuary or Protection from Evil and Good. But these two are okay as low-on spells, but again, we won't be using them. Now, our subclass feature, the Wielding Flare, is very nice as it imposes disadvantage. So what it does here is shield yourself with Divine Light, use your reaction to impose disadvantage on an attack, possibly causing their attack to miss. Disadvantage on the attacker. So this is nice as a backup in case somebody managed to actually hit you through your stacks of Radiant Orb. And in most cases, if you do have to use this and you do use it, they will miss you regardless. Then for your deity, you can really go with anyone. I went with Kelemvor. But yeah, I don't think any of this influences any choices other than maybe a few dialogue things and stuff like that. So yeah, go with your preference. For our ability scores, I'm going with 10 Strength, 17 Dexterity, 16 Constitution, and 14 Wisdom. Now, 10 Strength is again here to help us with carrying around some of the stuff we'll be lugging. Dexterity is here because we want to get extra armor class for our medium armor. And also, again, we will be focusing on ranged attacks primarily after we cast Spirit Guardians with this character, because they allow us to shoot arrows on many targets to inflict Radiating Orbs on 4 characters instead of 1 to 2 per turn. Constitution 16 to help us with our Constitution saving throws. This will be very important, as we'll be, of course, concentrating on Spirit Guardians pretty much every single fight. And then Wisdom 14 is namely here just so we have a little bit of a higher spell save, DC, and attack rolls, or primarily difficulty class, since most of our spells are actually gonna require difficulty class. Then for the skill proficiencies, I did go as my background as the Guild Artisan, so I have proficiency in Persuasion and Insight. You may choose any background you may prefer for your role-playing purposes, or if you have a different preference, it doesn't really matter, or it's completely up to you. Then for the skills that I went with this character, history. let's take into the expertise, or well, this additional proficiency we have here. So we have choices of 3 here for this example. So medicine, religion, and history aren't too useful, but since we can only really choose these, so I went with history and medicine. For the, I believe this is the extra skill proficiency that we got from our human trait. If you basically, it's very versatile. If you don't have anybody with survival, I would pick survival here so you can find those buried caches. Otherwise, my suggestion would be, if this is not the main phase of the party, that you take perception, investigation, since we already have insight. Investigation is very useful for, of course, in certain aspects of the game. Perception is probably the most useful one here because this helps you find those hidden or like obscured buttons and levers. So I would probably go with perception here in that case. All right, so for level 2, we're going to be sticking with our cleric, and we're going to be staying as a cleric until level 5, so we get our spirit guardians. But anyway, for level 2, we unlock our channel divinity charges, and we gain our 2 class actions, which is Turn Undead and Radiance of Dawn. Turn Undead is nice when you have a lot of undead around you to turn them, but what is generally a lot better ability is the Radiance of Dawn. So it's a 2d10 radiant damage dealing class action that has quite a big radius, and if targets do save, they still take half damage, so it's a quite nice damage dealing ability. Now for the prepared spells, this is also kind of the same at level 1. You want Bless, Sanctuary, Protection from Evil and Good, and you can take Healing Word for healing allies at a distance, since in the early game we will be using Hellrider gloves, which give which give you effective blade ward basically whenever you heal a target. Protection from Evil and Good is a pretty good spell throughout the entire game, since it affects a lot of the enemy types you will be encountering, so Aberrations, Celestials, Elementals, Fey Fiends, and Undead. They gain disadvantage on attack rolls against you, and then they cannot charm, frighten, or possess you, so a very good defensive spell that lasts until long rest, so we can cast this on ourselves or onto our allies. Sanctuary is great if you want to protect a certain target, so that they don't get attacked over the course of the battle initiative. And then, of course, Blessed, self-explanatory, 1d4 bonus for three targets at level 1, and then every level upcast that adds an additional target. At level 3, we unlock our second level spells. So light and wind spells, we gain the Flaming Sphere and Scorching Ray. We won't be using these too much, as Flaming Sphere is kind of underwhelming, and Scorching Rays require an attack roll, and we'll have relatively low attack rolls. But again, we're reserving our spell slots for Bless and spells. Basically, most of these early level spells. So primarily Bless, we're going to cast this at level 2, so we can cast it on our entire party. And then level 1, we can use it for these other spells. So the spell here that I would suggest you to add is Enhanced Ability. This gives you advantage of a chosen ability. So strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma, you gain advantage on those. Very useful in dialogue or any other situation. Another noteworthy thing you might want to use as well is Calm Emotions. What you could do is you could remove Healing Word and put Calm Emotions here, or you could also remove one of these two to do that as well. Although if you don't know what enemies can do frightened, I would then probably suggest sticking with this setup like so. Wait a minute, what am I missing? There we go. I would suggest taking Calm Emotions for permanent instead of enhanced ability, because if you do end up fighting enemies and you don't know that they can frighten or charm you, this is a very nice thing to save you and your party. But if you do know what the encounters are, then enhanced ability is much better here. Healing Word again is nice in the early game for giving allies Blade Ward effect with the gloves you can find on Zevlor if you pickpocket it off them. At level 4, we unlock an additional cantrip here. I'll just take Sacred Flame, because these two I think are much weaker, even though Sacred Flame is also quite bad as well, so but we'll just move on from that. Now here at level 4, we're gonna add Calm Emotions, so we can be our permanent spell now. You could also take Warning Bond, but I think you can cast it on an ally and then replace it with Calm Emotions, and it should stay, it shouldn't get removed. Now for our first fate, usually we would go with Ability Improvement +2, but here we're gonna go with the Warcaster. We want to get Warcaster immediately, so that then when we level up, we can start spamming Spirit Guardians, and we don't need to worry about enemies breaking our concentration on Spirit Guardians or Bless, especially since at this point, or at level 5, you can get Mintara's Boots, which are going to be a staple of this build, since it's going to be then very hard for you to break concentration or Wendos. But also at this point, level 5, you can deal with Anti-Ethel, and you can get an ability improvement +1 into one of your ability scores. There, I would suggest you put it into Dexterity, so you get it to an 18, so that then you can get a little bit more bonuses. At level 5, we unlock our 3rd level spells. We also get this turn dead, so when you successfully turn on the creature, it also takes 4 to 24 rain damage. Now, this is if you do turn them, so using the Radiance of Dawn is much better since it's gonna guarantee you deal damage to them. But anyway, for the light element spares, we of course get the Fireball. Pretty good. Who wouldn't want a Fireball, right? We also gain Daylight. Now, Daylight is actually gonna be quite useful for this character, especially in Act 2 and some darker parts of Act 3, since we will require a light source for one of our ring's effects to take effect, if that makes sense. So for the prepared spells, we of course have to put in here the Spirit Guardians. This is going to be the staple of the build, particularly the radiant damage dealing Spirit Guardians. What this does is you call for spirits to protect you. Nearby enemies take 3 to 24 radiant damage per turn, and their movement speed is halved. On save, targets still take half damage. So if they save, they still take this damage, which is very nice. At level 6, this is where we're going to start our multiclass. Now, you would get additional charges, Channel Divinity, and Improved Boarding Flare, but we don't really care to impose this, give this to our allies, since we're the ones that don't want to get hit. And it's nice to get another Channel Divinity charge, but we don't really need it, and we can get it later on our equip misses. What we're going to do instead is we're going to go multiclass into a Ranger. This is going to give us medium armor proficiency, shields, and it's going to give us martial weapons, so we'll be able to use heavy crossbows, which one of our equipment pieces will be a heavy crossbow, and as well we'll be using one of the long swords. So for the favorite enemy, out of all of these, I think you would probably want Bounty Hunter is nice, but we don't really need to since we will not be using Ensnaring Strike, right? Keeper of the Veil, we don't really need since we already have access to protection from evil and good, and Arcana isn't that great either. Mage Breaker, same thing, Arcana, and this gives you True Strike, not worth it. So the only one really we would kind of take here is Ranger Knight. This gives us proficiency in heavy armor, even though we don't really need it. But to be honest, you can go with any one of these. It won't make too much of a difference. So I might just take Bounty Hunter in case I end up, for whatever reason, using Ensnaring Strike. But anyway, for the Natural Explorer, I think the best one for you to go for would be Wasteland Wanderer Fire. This is going to give you resistance to fire damage, and there's a lot of fire damage in the game, so this will be very handy. Now for the abilities here, you do gain 1 point. It's by default in Stealth. Out of all of these, really you would probably want Survival. Animal Handling is not too useful, neither Nature is. Stealth doesn't matter because this is not your rogue or stealth character. You could also put it into Athletics if you want to have helps you shove and resist being shoved. So you could also go with that. If you already have somebody with Survival on, you could probably just go like this. But because of the boots that we'll be wearing, this doesn't matter because the boots, when we are concentrating on spells, make us, well, we can be moved against our will. So Survival it is. At level 7, we unlock our Ranger spells. And here, this character is great for getting Long Strider if you don't have it on the party, although it will be quite late, so keep that in mind. But Long Strider is quite handy, and I would probably just take Hunter's Mark or Enhanced Sleep. Enhanced Sleep outside of combat is a ritual spell, so you can cast this on basically a bunch of members of your party and you won't use up a spell slot. Now for this fighting style, we're going with Archer. We're going to be using Archery as our main sort of way of damage dealing, so this is going to help us with range attacks since we get a bonus of +2 to hit. At level 8, we unlock an additional spell, and here, honestly, you could take Speak with Animals or Hunter's Mark. It doesn't really matter what you take here. You can go with anything since you won't be really using any of these. You could use Fog to gain advantage, but I'll just take Hunter's Mark. And then for the subclass, we're going with Hunter. Now what Hunter does, it gives us Hunter's Prey, and we're going to take Colossal Slayer. So reason is we get once per turn, your weapon attacks deal an extra 1d8 damage if the target is below its maximum hit points. And odds are bunch of enemies will be below their maximum hit points since you're gonna have Spirit Guardians. So this is that damage increase once per turn you get of 1d8. So essentially you almost get 2 damage dies on your weapon. Although heavy crossbow is 1d10, but still this is a quite nice boost. And then for the spells, we don't need to replace anything. At level 9, we get our second feat, and here we're taking Crossbow Expert. When you make a range attacks with crossbows, within melee range, your attacks do not have disadvantage, and your piercing shot inflicts gaping wounds for twice as long. So we want this mainly so that we can use our crossbow in melee combat pretty much. This way we don't need to always run away from enemies to attack them, we can just shoot them in the face. But still, it's kind of good that you run away. So you can still do this so that you trigger their opportunity attacks so that they miss you and then take additional damage and additional stacks of radiating orbs, right? But reason we're going so heavily into Ranger will be at level 12, where we're gonna get enemies are gonna have disadvantage on attack rolls or opportunity attacks against us. But anyway, at level 10 we finally get our extra attack. It is quite late, but it's still manageable, because even at this point, a little bit before, we will get arrows on main target, so we'll still be quite decent with our range attacks. Now we also unlock our second level spells for the Ranger. Here I was just taking the Silent Sphere. Even though we already have access to it as our cleric, we don't really have any spots in our cleric spells, so getting it here is useful. This is great against, for example, the grenades in certain throne room or the audience chamber deal a lot of thunder damage, and this should basically just nullify those. At level 11, we unlock additional favorite enemy and natural explorer. Honestly, I'm just going to take Ranger Knight since neither of these will matter much. And then for the second natural explorer, Find Familiar isn't that great, and Sleight of Hand we don't really need, so we'll just go with Poison. Poison is the second best one, as I think the most common elemental damage types are Fire and then Poison. So Poison is great to have, especially against a certain hag. Then at level 12, we unlock our additional spell slot. So here, you can go with any of these, take your preference. I'll just go with Spike Growth since it can be useful as a area denial spell. And then for the defensive tactics, alright, so this is why we wanted to go so heavily into the cleric. So we have the Escape the Horde. Opportunity attacks against you have disadvantage. So since enemies will have a hard time hitting us when we run away or move, they're gonna have an even harder time now to hit us when we trigger opportunity attacks. And enemies that have advantage in opportunity attacks, such as some of the ballist enemies in the late game, they have advantage. They will now have just a standard chance to hit us. Well, it's gonna be now basically null because they don't have advantage regardless. So a very useful passive feature to have. The other two, Steel Will, we don't really care about. Advantage and safety against being frightened, we have Calm Emotions. And then multi-attack defense, again, doesn't really matter since, well, they'll have almost no chance to hit us anyway. So, yeah. Alright, so that is it for the levels. I'll now see you in the equipment showcase. Alright, so here we are in the equipment section. So let's start with our headgear. For our helmet, we have the Whole Lance Helm. Creatures who miss their attack rolls against the wearer must make a dexterity saving throw or take 1d4 radiant damage. So this is going to scale or synergize greatly with our armor. So here we have the luminous armor. When the wearer deals radiant damage, they cause a radiant shockwave, which inflicts radiant orb in a 10-feet radius, and radiant orb gives the affected entities -1 to attack rolls for each turn remaining. This effect reduces by 2 each time an entity makes an attack. So they kind of synergize off of each other. Then for the cloak, we're going with the Cloak of Protection. Armor class and save thrust +1. Self-explanatory, simple, and a useful cloak. The other cloak you take is the one that gives you the effects of blur as well. That one is quite nice as well. For the gloves, we're going with the Gloves of Belligerent Skies. When the wearer deals thunder damage, lightning damage, or radiant damage, inflict 2 turns of reverberation upon a target. So what the reverberation does, it gives the affected entity -1 penalty to strength, dexterity, and constitution saving throws per turn remaining. So at 4 turns, it's going to be a -4. But when the entity has 5 turns or more of reverberation, it takes 1d4 radiant damage and possibly knocks prone. Condition is removed afterwards. So these gloves are also going to synergize with our helmet, since the helmet requires a dexterity saving throw, and reverberation gives you a penalty on saves on that. Or not you, but enemies. For the alternative, you could take the luminous gloves. When the wearer deals radiant damage, the target receives 2 turns of radiant orb, so you can stack even more of this effect onto enemies when you attack them. For the boots, we're going with the Boots of Striding. When you cast a spell that requires concentration, you gain momentum for 1 turn. This is okay, but mainly we want for the second effect. When you're concentrating, you can't get knocked prone or move against your will. So these boots are going to anchor us to the point where the only way enemies can break our concentration is if they deal damage to us with attacks that don't require an attack roll. So for example, Fireball. or if they somehow manage to hit us through all of the stacks of radiant orbs and reeling we're gonna afflict onto them. But yeah, it's gonna be very nearly impossible for us to break concentration with these boots on. For the alternatives, you could take the Boots of Stormy Clamor. When they inflicts a condition upon a hostile creature, they also inflict 2 turns of reverberation, so you can get even more stacks of this, but in my opinion, Boots of Starting are much better here in this case. Now for our amulet, I'm going with the amulet of the Devout. You gain plus 2 bonus to spell save DC. This is going to help us to get that little bit higher damage with Spirit Guardians, so it's harder for enemies to save against them. And then we also gain additional charge of Channel Divinity. Once used, it is stored upon a long rest. So you get 1 additional charge per long rest, since this does recharge on a short rest. For the alternative, you can take the Pripyat of Wound Closure. When down, automatically stabilized at the start of turn. This is useful for the earlier game, and then whenever you're healed, you restore the maximum number of hit points possible. So this is a more of a earlier game amulet that you use before you have the full build running, so that then you can just drink 1 potion and heal fully to get your health back up. Because at this point in the game, you probably won't even take damage, only again if they have something like Fireball. For our rings, we're going with the Cruciation Ring. I don't know how to pronounce that, but we're going with this. When the wearer deals spell damage while illuminated by a light source, they inflict Radiant Orb upon the target for 2 turns. So we get even more stacks onto enemies with this. And then the second ring, we're going with the Callous Glow Ring. When the wearer deals additional 2 points of damage against creatures that are illuminated. Now these 2 points of damage are always radiant damage. So what's going to happen is whenever we deal damage with our crossbow, it's going to trigger the luminous armor. So when the wearer deals radiant damage, it goes to radiant shockwave. So yes, we're going to be inflicting a lot of radiant orbs with our crossbow and the arrows on many targets. Then for our weapons, we're going with the Falar Aluve, namely because as basically a stat stick, or basically for the Falar Aluve melody, and namely for the Shriek. So what this does is the sword shrieks. All enemies within 20 feet of range have 1d4 penalty to Charisma, Wisdom, and Intelligence saving throws, and the affected creatures take an additional 1d4 thunder damage. So this is going to quite heavily synergize with Spirit Guardians, since both of these are basically areas around us that we can move on and then inflict on traditional enemies with. Then for the shield, we're going with the Adamantine Shield. When a melee attack misses you, the attacker is sent reeling for 2 turns. We also get the Shield Bash, so we can knock a foe prone if they hit us with a melee attack, but that probably won't happen ever. And we also immune to critical hits, so we can't get hit by a critical. So this is basically going to inflict reeling every time a melee attack misses you, so it's gonna synergize greatly with Radiant Orb. And then our ranged weapon, the Giant Breaker, your weapon hit hard enough to send your targets reeling for 2 turns. So basically with this, when we hit enemies, we send them reeling, so they have a higher chance of missing us. And then when they do miss us, if they are melee enemies, they get sent reeling again for 2 turns, so they have an even lower chance of hitting us the next time again. So these two kind of have us both covered when we attack and when we are on the defense. And then for some of the additional items we have here, I'm using the arrows of many targets because this will afflict reeling, Radiant Orb, and the reverberation on all 4 enemies, since this target does bounce 3 more times after you hit somebody. So you can basically debuff 1 to 8 enemies depending on how many targets there are, because if you choose a different target, the arrow might bounce to different enemies then. And then of course this character was my sort of the potion of healing carrier, so you can use that as well. Alright, so that's it for the equipment. I will see you in the combat showcase. Alright, so here we have the Flaming Fist Barracks for Eternal Baldur Showcase. So before combat started, I did activate Spirit Guardians and Falar Aluve Shriek before I initiated combat. I do have a use up action, but that is fine, because normally when you start combat and you want to get all of your buffs going, you would drink a Potion of Speed. So you have 2 actions, so you can activate both of these at the same turn. And then the next turn you would want to start shooting. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go approach these Flaming Fists and inflict Spirit Guardians and Reverberation on them. And then we're gonna shoot the guy closest to us, because if we try to shoot the one that's further, we can have disadvantage because we are threatened. But because of Crossbow Expert, if we shoot the one that's right next to us or closest to us, we will not have any penalties. And as you can see, every one of these that we shot, we dealt thunder damage because of the Shriek, but we also dealt radiant damage because of our rings, since they are illuminated by a light source, so they are not standing in darkness. So we can use up our second attack to do even more damage. We managed to knock him prone with our aeration. So now let's try to hit this cleric with our spirit guardians as well, and then let's move on to the wizard. Now we don't care if we trigger opportunity attacks because odds of enemies hitting us are quite low, and as you can see we actually have reeling on all of them, so of 4, and then someone I have 2, and then this guy got 2 because when they attack, reeling actually gets removed, so they lose all of the stacks of reeling when they attack, but because he missed us, the shield actually gave him an additional 2 stacks. And then generally the idea is you shoot and then you move around the battlefield trying to get as many enemies into this as possible, or if there's a big group. So normally if I was actually fighting these guys and not showcasing, I would stay here because then I would have all of these 3 in my spirit guardians. But that is it for the build. I hope you enjoyed. I would appreciate it if you leave a like and subscribe for more Baldur's Gate 3 content, and I'll see you in the next one.